an electronic receipt for a premium honeymoon package synced to our family cloud at exactly 11:45 at night, accompanied by a live stream from a Vegas chapel. My husband, supposedly pitching a project in Seattle, was slipping a wedding band onto another woman. He thought this secret marriage would destroy me and leave my assets vulnerable. He had no idea that the moment he said "I do," he triggered the flawless trap I spent 8 months building. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Zoe Revenge Stories. Our channel was recently demonetized by YouTube, leaving us with absolutely no budget to keep operating, but we are still deeply committed to bringing you these thrilling narratives. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating new stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description and the pinned comment. My name is Quinn Ryan. I am 33 years old, and I work as the Director of Systems Development at Vanguard Kinetics, a leading firm in advanced simulation technology. It was a Tuesday night in Chicago. The wind was howling against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office, but inside, the air was perfectly still. I was sitting at my desk, running a final diagnostic on a new server architecture, when my secondary monitor lit up. A subtle chime echoed in the quiet room. It was a cloud synchronization alert. Leo, my husband, had a terrible habit of leaving his devices logged in on my secure home network. According to his meticulously crafted schedule, he was supposed to be in Seattle, standing in a hotel boardroom pitching a major sales initiative. Instead, raw data packets were streaming in from a very different time zone. I opened the synchronized folder. A high-definition video file began to buffer, immediately followed by a digital receipt. The receipt was the first thing that caught my eye. It was a finalized electronic invoice for a premium honeymoon package at a luxury resort, time-stamped at exactly 11:45 at night. I clicked on the video file. The screen filled with the garish neon glow of a suburban Las Vegas chapel. The camera angle was slightly shaky, likely held by a paid witness or an enthusiastic bridesmaid. Standing at the altar was Leo. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost roughly $4,000, a purchase that had ironically been charged to a platinum credit card under my name just 3 weeks prior. And there, standing opposite him, wrapped in an outrageously flashy white dress, was Sienna. I recognized her immediately. She was a high-profile real estate broker whose reputation for wild partying and reckless spending far eclipsed her actual professional sales record. I watched as Leo leaned in and kissed her. I watched him slide a heavy diamond band onto her finger. For most people, this would be the moment the world completely collapses. There would be a sharp gasp, a shattering of glass, tears streaming down the face, and a frantic, hysterical phone call demanding immediate answers. I felt absolutely none of that. My pulse did not race. My breathing did not hitch. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washed over me. I looked at the glowing screen not as a betrayed, heartbroken wife, but as a systems engineer identifying a fatal, unrecoverable error in a line of code. Leo had just executed a critical mistake. He genuinely thought he was being clever. He assumed that a quick, secret marriage in Nevada would serve as a devastating psychological blow, a sudden shock that would leave me utterly paralyzed, humiliated, and emotionally ruined. He calculated that while I was busy grieving the sudden destruction of our marriage, he would have the perfect, uninterrupted opportunity to return home, manipulate my vulnerable state, and quietly siphon off our shared assets before I could even hire a lawyer. It was a highly predictable strategy from a man whose blind ambition was only outmatched by his profound, staggering arrogance. He had no idea that I had known about his true, rotten nature for a very long time. I closed the video player. There was serious work to be done. I opened a hidden, encrypted terminal on my desktop. For the past 8 months, I had been writing, testing, and refining a custom security protocol, waiting patiently for the exact moment he would finally cross the point of no return. He had just handed me the launch codes on a silver platter. I executed the first sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4 clicks. That was all it took. Instantly, the automated script deployed across the financial network, locking Leo out of every single joint financial account we possessed: checking, savings, high-yield investment portfolios, and premium credit lines were completely and permanently severed from his access. The digital vault slammed shut, leaving him with nothing but the plastic rectangles in his leather wallet, which were now functionally useless pieces of garbage. Next, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the private security firm that managed my luxury building. I calmly instructed the night shift supervisor to immediately activate the highest tier of biometric lockdown for my penthouse. I had purchased this massive property with my own hard-earned money long before Leo and I ever walked down the aisle, making it entirely, legally mine. Within a matter of seconds, his fingerprints, his retinal scans, and his personalized entry passcodes were permanently wiped from the building's registry. He was officially a ghost to the system. I stood up from my desk and walked down the hall into his massive walk-in closet. It was filled to the brim with designer clothing he could never actually afford on his own salary. I ignored the imported Italian wool suits and the bespoke silk shirts. Instead, I reached into the darkest, dustiest corner of the wardrobe and pulled out exactly 3 of his cheapest, oldest, and most frayed suits. I tossed them carelessly into a plain cardboard box. I added a single pair of scuffed, worn-out dress shoes that he had not worn in over 5 years. Before taping the cardboard box shut, I grabbed a thick black marker and wrote a single sentence on a piece of heavy cardstock. "Congratulations to the groom." I carried the sad little box down to the main lobby and instructed the bewildered concierge to leave it outside on the pavement, right past the glass revolving doors. When I finally returned to my quiet apartment, the silence was absolute and deeply satisfying. I walked over to the mahogany bar cart in the living room, pulled out a heavy crystal tumbler, and poured myself a generous measure of aged bourbon. I brought the glass back to my dark office, sat down at my desk, and pulled up the live feed from the building's exterior security cameras. I took a slow sip, letting the intense warmth of the amber liquid settle deep in my chest. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, my eyes fixed intently on the glowing security monitors. Now, all I had to do was wait. I knew exactly how the rest of this night would unfold. I was simply waiting for the inevitable, frantic, embarrassing phone call that would undoubtedly ring through the exact moment the front desk clerk at a luxurious 5-star Vegas hotel looked Leo right in the eye and coldly informed him that his platinum card had just been declined. As I sat in the dim light of my office, waiting for the inevitable fallout in Nevada, my mind drifted back to a brisk morning exactly 8 months ago. That was the precise moment the meticulously constructed facade of my marriage began to crumble. Most betrayed wives uncover their husband's infidelity through a lingering scent of cheap perfume on a shirt collar, a suspiciously late night at the office, or a smeared lipstick stain on a coffee cup. I found my betrayal buried deep within a directory of encrypted files. I was performing a routine network security sweep of our home servers when I noticed a massive anomaly. A huge cache of data had been quietly cloned from my personal workstation and transferred to a hidden, partitioned drive on Leo's laptop. It was not a folder of mundane household expenses or digitized family photographs. It was the proprietary source code for Vanguard Kinetics' most highly classified predictive modeling project. It was my entire life's work. I remember staring at the raw code on the screen, dissecting the situation with the cold, detached precision of an engineer diagnosing a critical system failure. Leo was a mid-level sales director. His understanding of advanced simulation architecture was practically non-existent. Why would a man who barely knew how to restart his own wireless router attempt to steal gigabytes of heavily guarded corporate secrets? The answer required a deep dive into his personal finances, which he had fiercely guarded from me under the guise of maintaining his independence. What I found was an absolute disaster zone. Leo was drowning. He had gambled heavily on obscure, highly volatile cryptocurrency markets and lost absolutely everything. His debts were astronomical, spiraling well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was cornered, and he was desperate. His grand, pathetic scheme was to steal my intellectual property and sell it to a massive rival technology firm. In exchange for the stolen architecture, he had secretly negotiated a lucrative buyout and a guaranteed seat as their new vice president of operations. But a mid-level salesman could not broker a black market corporate espionage deal of that magnitude on his own. He needed a proxy. He needed a negotiator who moved freely in shady circles and possessed an absolute lack of moral compass. Enter Sienna. She was not just a convenient side piece he picked up at a hotel bar. She was the primary architect of his treason. Sienna operated as the illicit broker directly connecting Leo to the shadowy executives of the rival corporation. The most pathetic part of their entire dynamic was the foundation of lies they built it upon. Sienna genuinely believed she had snagged a brilliant, undiscovered tech billionaire. Leo had completely convinced her that he was the true mastermind behind the Vanguard Kinetic software, and that I was merely an administrative assistant riding his coattails to success. When I pieced the entire puzzle together, the natural human instinct would have been to scream, to immediately file for divorce, and to call the police, but exposing him right then would only result in a messy, protracted legal battle over our shared assets, potentially dragging my beloved company into a highly damaging public scandal. I needed a cleaner, far more devastating solution. I scheduled a highly confidential meeting with my personal attorney, Elias. Elias was a legal shark who operated with the exact same surgical ruthlessness that I applied to software development. We sat in his heavily soundproof downtown office, laying out a blueprint for a trap so perfectly intricate that Leo would never see it coming until the steel jaws snapped securely shut. We do not stop him, I told Elias that day. We help him. Over the next 8 months, I went to work. I did not block his access to the partitioned drive. Instead, I quietly rerouted his download path directly into a controlled sandbox environment on my server. I spent countless sleepless nights carefully rewriting the cloned source code. I injected microscopic, cascading logic errors into the core architecture. It was heavily disguised, flawed data, a beautifully crafted digital poison. To an untrained eye or a desperate salesman, the code looked absolutely flawless and revolutionary. But the exact moment his buyers tried to compile and execute the software on their own expensive corporate servers, the malicious loops would trigger. It would instantly cause a recursive overload, completely corrupting their proprietary systems and rendering the stolen asset worse than worthless. I was letting him steal a rigged grenade, and I was happily watching him carry it right into the enemy headquarters. While I was laying the digital landmines, Elias was maneuvering the legal battlefield. I spent those same 8 months systematically liquidating and transferring every single piece of valuable real estate and high-yield investment I had brought into the marriage. We moved absolutely everything into a highly secure, heavily insulated blind trust. On paper, my net worth plummeted overnight. I systematically reduced my financial footprint until, legally speaking, I appeared to be nothing more than a regular salaried employee living paycheck to paycheck. If Leo tried to initiate a divorce to take half of my empire, he would find absolutely nothing but empty accounts and legally untouchable shell structures. The pieces were perfectly aligned, and that brought the entire picture of his secret wedding into sharp, agonizing focus. The ceremony in Las Vegas was not an act of spontaneous romance. It was a calculated, desperate business transaction. The rival company was demanding final delivery of the source code by the end of the week. Leo believed he was mere days away from receiving a massive, multi-million-dollar payout. But he also knew his cryptocurrency debts were dangerously overdue, and the loan sharks were circling tight. He married Sienna in a frantic attempt to legally bind their financial interests together, securing her unwavering loyalty and ensuring she would not cut him out of the final brokerage fee before the fake data deal officially closed. He honestly thought he was outsmarting everyone, securing a fortune and a brand new life. He was a man walking proudly toward a golden throne, entirely unaware that the floor beneath him had already been removed. It took exactly 72 hours for reality to catch up with him, 3 days after the spectacular implosion of his secret wedding. The security feed in my living room chimed. I sat back on my velvet sofa, watching the high-definition monitor. There he was. Leo stood outside the heavy oak double doors of my penthouse, trying his absolute best to arrange his features into the exhausted but loving expression of a dedicated corporate husband returning from a grueling business trip. His physical state, however, betrayed his miserable reality. The custom tuxedo was gone, replaced by a wrinkled dress shirt that looked like it had been slept in for 2 consecutive nights. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. A harsh red light flashed. Access denied. He frowned, wiping his thumb on his trousers, and tried again. Access denied. Panic began to tighten the muscles around his jaw. He punched in his personalized 6-digit entry code. The keypad beeped an aggressive warning tone. Finally, he pressed the intercom button. His voice crackled through the speaker, laced with a thin, artificial cheerfulness. "Hey, honey, it is me. I am back from Seattle earlier than expected. The fingerprint scanner out here is completely glitching out, and my passcode is not working either. Could you buzz me in? I really need to grab my work laptop right now. I have an urgent client deliverable." His laptop, of course, the machine housing the rigged Vanguard Kinetics data, the only thing he actually cared about retrieving. I picked up my iPad, unlocked the screen, and walked slowly toward the foyer. I did not rush. I let him stand in the hallway, baking in his own rising anxiety. When I finally pulled the heavy brass handle and opened the door, the first thing that greeted him was not my voice. It was the tinny, overly synthesized organ music playing directly from the speakers of my tablet. Leo froze, his eyes locked onto the glowing screen in my hands. The video was looped. It was currently showing the exact moment he slipped the wedding band onto Sienna's finger. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked practically translucent. His mouth opened, closed, and opened again like a suffocating fish on a dry dock. The silence in the hallway was thick, heavy, and absolutely delicious. "Seattle looks exceptionally bright this time of year," I said. My voice was a flat, unreadable calm. Though I must admit, I am surprised the corporate boardrooms have installed neon crosses. "Quinn, listen to me," he stammered, his hands coming up in a defensive, frantic gesture. "That is not you are taking this completely out of context. It is a fake video. It is a deep fake. No, wait, it is a play." I leaned against the doorframe, watching his brain misfire as he scrambled for a lifeline. "A play?" I repeated, tasting the absurdity of the word. "Yes, it was an undercover corporate strategy," he blurted out, the lies tumbling over each other in a desperate avalanche. "The clients I was meeting with, they are part of this weird, high-society underground network. I had to pretend to marry this woman to gain their trust. It was the only way to secure the contract. I swear to you, Quinn, I was slipped something at the hotel bar. Someone drugged my drink. I barely even remember being in that chapel." He was sweating profusely now. The sheer audacity of his narrative was almost impressive in its utter stupidity. "So, let me ensure I understand this correctly," I said, tilting my head. "You were drugged, dragged to a chapel, and forced into a highly choreographed wedding ceremony, complete with a platinum ring you purchased on my credit card 3 weeks ago, all to secure a software contract." "Exactly," he gasped, his eyes wide with desperate hope that I was actually buying this garbage. "It means absolutely nothing. She means nothing. I am the victim here." Right on cue, a soft, melodic chime echoed through the corridor. The private elevator doors slid open behind him. High heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. Sienna stepped out. The glamorous facade she wore in the wedding video was completely obliterated. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her designer mascara had flaked under her eyes, and she radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated fury. She had clearly utilized her real estate connections to track down this address. "You miserable, lying coward!" Sienna shrieked. her voice echoing violently off the expensive walls. Leo whipped around. If he looked pale before, he now resembled a genuine corpse. "Sienna," he choked out. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" She marched toward him, jabbing a manicured finger hard into his chest. "You vanished out the back door of the hotel 2 hours after the ceremony. The front desk manager humiliated me in the lobby because your so-called limitless platinum card was declined for a $10,000 suite. I had to empty my own emergency savings just to avoid being arrested for defrauding a hotel. Where is your money? Leo, where is the tech billionaire empire you promised me?" Leo was completely trapped. He stood directly between the woman he had betrayed and the woman he had used. His eyes darted wildly between the two of us. A rat caught in a beautifully constructed maze with absolutely no exits. "Sienna, please, just lower your voice," he hissed, grabbing her wrist before she yanked it away in disgust. He then turned back to me, his expression morphing into a mask of tragic victimhood. "Quinn, look at her," he pleaded, gesturing wildly at Sienna. "Look at this unstable woman. She is insane. She is a predatory broker who completely set me up to extort me. She tricked me into this. You have to let me inside. You are my real wife. You are my legal, lawful wife. Just let me get my laptop, and we can call the police on her together." Sienna gasped, her jaw dropping at the sheer magnitude of his betrayal. "You told me she was just your unhinged secretary. You told me you were divorcing her." I did not break eye contact with Leo. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single drop of anger leak into my posture. I simply smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of an executioner pulling a lever. "You are remarkably consistent, Leo," I said smoothly. "Always a victim of circumstance, always someone else to blame. But I think Sienna deserves to know exactly what you think of your new bride." I did not need to explain how I had maintained remote access to his compromised phone. I simply tapped a new icon on my iPad screen. The wedding video disappeared, replaced by an audio waveform. I turned the volume all the way up. The recording was crystal clear. It was a captured phone call from the night of their wedding, time-stamped just moments before he fled the hotel. Leo's arrogant, sneering voice filled the hallway. "Look, just get the buyer ready." Leo's recorded voice echoed off the marble walls. "The Vanguard code is perfectly packaged. Yes, I had to marry the broker. No, it does not matter. She is just a gold-digging idiot. The second the wire transfer clears into my offshore account, I am dropping her. She actually thinks I am sharing the profits. It is pathetic. Just finalize the server transfer." The audio clip ended. The resulting silence in the hallway was so absolute. It felt like all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the building. I looked at Sienna. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horrific, dawning realization that she had not secured a golden ticket. She had handcuffed herself to a sinking ship. I looked back at Leo. He was staring at the iPad as if it were a live explosive device. There were no more lies to spin. The play was over. The curtains had dropped, and the spotlight was burning straight through him. The sound of the slap was a violent, sharp crack that rang through the corridor like a gunshot. Sienna had put the entire weight of her ruined future into that single, devastating strike. Leo crumpled instantly, his shoulder slamming hard against the heavy oak doors, before he slid down to the polished marble floor. He sat there for a long moment, clutching his reddened cheek, his chest heaving as he stared blindly at the designer shoes of the woman he had just married. Sienna stood over him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked absolutely thoroughly disgusted. Completely stripped of her glamorous veneer, she turned on her heel, stabbing the elevator call button with a shaking finger. She wanted nothing more to do with this disaster, but the nightmare was far from over. Leo let out a low, dark chuckle. It was a terrible sound, completely devoid of humor. The pathetic, groveling husband act vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by something feral and deeply vicious. He pushed himself off the floor, straightening his wrinkled shirt. His eyes locked onto mine. and the sheer malice radiating from him was palpable. The mask had completely fallen off. "You really think you have won, do you not?" Leo spat, taking a step toward me. The biometric scanner glowed a faint red next to him, a silent reminder that he was locked out of his own life. "You think tossing my cheap suits on the street and locking the bank accounts changes the fundamental facts of our situation. We are still legally married, Quinn, and under the laws of this state, I am legally entitled to exactly 50% of all marital assets generated during our union." He reached inside the breast pocket of his ruined jacket, his fingers trembling with a toxic mixture of rage and adrenaline. "I do not need your penthouse," he snarled, pulling out a meticulously folded piece of heavy legal parchment. "And I certainly do not need your pathetic savings, because even if we file for divorce tomorrow morning, I own 50% of the multi-million-dollar software architecture I just successfully brokered. The deal is completely locked in." He unfolded the paper with an aggressive flick of his wrist and pressed it flat against the wall, pointing a shaking finger at the bottom of the page. "You authorize this," he declared, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. "This is a legally binding letter of intent. I told you it was a standard vendor agreement for a third-party server upgrade, and you signed it without even looking. It explicitly grants me full executive power of attorney to transfer the Vanguard Kinetics source code to Apex Dynamics. They have already signed the term sheet. The transfer is authorized, the money is guaranteed, and you cannot do a single thing to stop it." I looked at the document. Then, I looked at his desperate, sweat-drenched face. The psychological trap was primed, and it was finally time to spring the mechanism. "Apex Dynamics," I repeated slowly, letting the syllables roll off my tongue. I stepped slightly out of the doorway, leaning against the cold wall. "A highly aggressive technology acquisition firm, known for making massive, rapid purchases of proprietary software systems. They offered you an incredibly lucrative buyout, did they not? Tens of millions of dollars, plus a guaranteed vice president title the moment the raw data hit their external servers." Leo narrowed his eyes, his sudden confusion warring with his arrogant confidence. "Yes, exactly. They recognize the actual value of the project, value that I am going to cash out." "Did you ever wonder why the chief acquisition officer at Apex Dynamics never once insisted on a video conference?" I asked, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Did you ever think it was mathematically improbable that a massive corporation willing to spend tens of millions of dollars on untested, highly classified simulation architecture only communicated through heavily encrypted emails and burner phones?" The color began to drain from Leo's face once again. His jaw tightened. "Apex Dynamics is not a technology acquisition firm, Leo," I stated with absolute, surgical precision. "It does not have an office in Silicon Valley. It does not have a board of directors. Apex Dynamics is a phantom corporation. It is a completely empty shell company registered to a vacant post office box in Delaware. My attorney, Elias, filed the official incorporation paperwork exactly 6 months ago, acting under my direct instruction. The aggressive, high-rolling acquisition officer you have been secretly negotiating with for the past 12 weeks, that was Elias, typing those emails from the comfort of his guest bedroom." Sienna, who had been waiting for the elevator, slowly turned around. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. Leo stopped breathing. He stared at me, his brain violently rejecting the information. "You are lying," he whispered, his voice cracking. "That is impossible. The broker verified the firm. The funds were verified in escrow." "The broker is a fool who saw what she wanted to see," I replied, not even glancing at Sienna. "You did not sell stolen corporate data to a rival firm. Leo, you sold it directly back to me. You handed over your entire strategy, your entire timeline, and your complete digital footprint directly to the person you were trying to destroy." I took a slow breath, enjoying the absolute terror blossoming in his eyes. "If you had simply tried to drain our checking accounts or forged a check, we would be sitting in family court dealing with a messy divorce asset dispute," I explained, dropping the temperature of my voice until it was ice cold. "But you did not do that. You used the secure Vanguard Kinetics corporate servers to initiate an unauthorized transfer of highly classified, defense-grade simulation data to an external, unverified corporate entity. Every single keystroke, every downloaded packet, and every encrypted email was meticulously logged by our internal security mainframe. You took a domestic dispute and proudly elevated it to a severe violation of federal law. You committed corporate espionage. No, Leo gasped, stumbling backward until his back hit the opposite wall. He held up the contract like a physical shield. No, you signed this. I have your legal authorization right here. It proves you gave me permission to move the files. You are complicit. I smiled. It was the same chilling smile I had given him through the security camera hours earlier. Look closely at the signature line, Leo. He frantically pulled the paper closer to his face. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes as if his vision was failing him. The bottom right corner of the document, where my bold signature should have been anchored in black ink, was completely, utterly blank. Where is it? He choked out, his fingers desperately rubbing the empty white space. I watched you sign this. I physically watched you sign it with your own pen. You watched me sign it with a pen I handed to you, I corrected him smoothly. A pen loaded with a highly specialized thermal friction ink. The chemical composition of that specific ink causes it to completely evaporate and become invisible when exposed to any temperature exceeding 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Or coincidentally, when it is folded up and shoved tightly inside a warm wool jacket pocket, pressed firmly against the sweating chest of a panicking man who has been running around the scorching Nevada desert for 3 days. He stared at the blank paper, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. Hold the paper up to the hallway light, I commanded softly. His hands shook violently as he raised the document toward the bright overhead recessed lighting. As the light passed through the heavy parchment, a hidden, embedded security watermark became glaringly visible beneath the empty signature line. Leo read the watermark aloud, his voice barely a hollow, raspy whisper. Property of the Ryan Blind Trust. The physical reality of his situation crashed down upon him like a concrete vault. He was not a soon-to-be millionaire. He was a man holding a fake contract, married to a broker who despised him, staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. Now you understand, I said, taking one step back inside my doorway. You did not come back here tonight because your keycard was glitching. You came back because you suddenly realized you left your work laptop sitting on the kitchen island. And you suddenly realized that specific laptop is the only physical device in existence containing the raw, unauthorized cloning logs. It is the ultimate murder weapon. And you, like an absolute fool, just came knocking on my door, begging me to let you walk right back into the active crime scene. Sienna realized the man she had just married was not just broke. He was an active crime scene facing a minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal lockup. Her survival instinct kicked in with terrifying, robotic speed. She did not scream, and she certainly did not offer him any comfort. She simply pulled out her gold-plated smartphone. You are not dragging me down into a federal indictment with you, she hissed, her manicured fingers flying across the screen. She was aggressively compiling every single text message, every fabricated bank statement he had forwarded her, and every manipulative voice note where he promised her millions. With one decisive tap, she uploaded the entire cache to her professional social media accounts, exposing his massive fraud to her 30,000 followers. She spun the narrative instantly, loudly branding herself as the tragic, financially abused victim of a sociopathic con artist. She was actively destroying him in real time to save her own skin. Before Leo could even fully process Sienna's digital assassination, his own phone began vibrating aggressively in his pocket. He scrambled to pull it out. The caller ID displayed his mother's name. These were the exact same parents who had spent the last 5 years making passive-aggressive remarks about my career, constantly whispering that I was too rigid, too focused on my company, and lacked the soft, nurturing warmth a traditional husband needed. Leo answered the call, his thumb slipping and putting it on speaker in his trembling panic. A chaotic, agonizing chorus of sobbing and screaming erupted from the tiny device. His father had just returned from a disastrous meeting at their local bank branch. It turned out that to keep his vicious loan sharks at bay and to fund his delusional, high society charade with Sienna, Leo had forged his own parents' signatures on legal documents. He had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their fully paid-off retirement home. They were now facing immediate foreclosure and total bankruptcy. "You stole our house, Leo," his mother wailed through the speaker, her voice thick with absolute, soul-crushing despair. "The bank is taking everything we have worked for. How could you do this to your own family?" That specific moment was the breaking point. The realization that he had financially destroyed his parents, lost his mistress, and doomed himself to federal prison snapped the last remaining thread of his sanity. He dropped the phone onto the marble floor. With a primal, guttural roar, he lunged forward, charging straight at my open door. His singular, deranged goal was to reach the secure server racks located in my home office and physically smash the hard drives to pieces to destroy the evidence. I did not even flinch. I did not raise my hands to defend myself. I simply took one step backward into my brightly lit foyer. The two massive private security contractors I had stationed inside my apartment hours ago stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. They moved with terrifying, practiced military efficiency. Before Leo could even cross the threshold of my home, the larger guard grabbed him by the collar of his ruined shirt, spun him around, and slammed him face first into the polished marble floor. The sickening thud of his impact echoed loudly through the corridor. In less than 3 seconds, his arms were wrenched violently behind his back, and the cold steel of heavy handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, locking him down. Leo thrashed frantically against the floor, kicking his legs and screaming unhinged obscenities, but the contractors pinned him down effortlessly. He was completely powerless. I walked calmly into my kitchen, stepping carefully over his flailing legs. I picked up a fresh cup of dark roast coffee I had poured just before opening the door. I walked back and stood directly over him, looking down at his pathetic, writhing form without a single ounce of pity. "Let me go," he screamed, a mixture of spit and blood welling in the corner of his mouth. "I will destroy you, Quinn." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my warm coffee. "You are in absolutely no position to destroy anything. Leo," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through his pathetic hysteria. "In addition to the federal criminal charges for corporate espionage, Vanguard Kinetics is filing a massive civil suit against you for breach of fiduciary duty and attempted intellectual property theft. We are seeking compensatory damages in excess of $12 million, your wages. Should you ever somehow find employment after you are released from prison, will be legally garnished at a rate of 65% until the day you die." The chime of the private elevator sounded one final time. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out into the corridor. I had called the local precinct 20 minutes before I even opened my front door, reporting a hostile trespasser aggressively attempting to break into my secure residence. The officers took one look at the chaotic situation and immediately took custody of Leo. They hauled him roughly to his feet. His designer dress shirt was now torn violently down the back, exposing his bruised shoulder, and his expensive trousers were ruined. He looked exactly like a wild animal that had finally been caught in a trap it built itself. He did not say another word. His eyes were completely vacant, staring blankly ahead in total shock as the officers loudly read him his Miranda rights and marched him onto the elevator. The fallout over the next 72 hours was absolute poetry. The local tabloids and gossip blogs had an absolute field day with Sienna's leaked documents, splashing his face across the internet. Their glamorous, secret Las Vegas wedding was legally annulled within 4 days, wiped from the registry as if it were nothing but a clerical error. Sienna vanished from the city, her reputation as a high-end broker entirely obliterated by her association with him. And on Friday morning, the federal prosecutor officially signed the grand jury indictment, permanently cementing the end of Leo's pathetic illusion of a high society life. Exactly 3 months later, The final chapter of our marriage did not conclude in the warm, wood-paneled rooms of a local family court. It ended in a sterile, aggressively fluorescent-lit interrogation room deep inside the regional headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Leo sat across from me at a cold steel table. He was facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for massive commercial fraud and the attempted theft of classified intellectual property. The man sitting before me was entirely unrecognizable. He had aged 20 years in the span of 90 days. His skin was sallow, his hands trembled violently, and he wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by his completely exhausted public defender. "Quinn, please," he whimpered, his voice breaking as he leaned forward, clasping his shaking hands together. "I am begging you. You have the power to stop this. You can tell the federal prosecutors it was a massive misunderstanding. You can drop the civil lawsuit. If you just keep me out of a prison cell, I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my natural life paying you back. I will be your absolute slave. I will scrub your floors. Just please, do not let them lock me in a cage." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing, no anger, no pity, and certainly no lingering affection, just the quiet, clinical satisfaction of watching a mathematical equation solve itself perfectly. I turned to my attorney, Elias, and the two federal prosecutors standing by the door. "Gentlemen, please leave the room. Give us exactly 5 minutes." They nodded and stepped out, the heavy metal door clicking firmly shut behind them. We were completely alone. The silence in the room was heavier than lead. Without saying a word, I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, tightly bound manila folder, and slid it slowly across the metal table until it rested directly under his trembling hands. "Open it," I commanded softly. Leo fumbled with the clasp and flipped open the cover. His sunken eyes scanned the top document, and then the next, and the next. As he read, his breathing stopped completely. "While you were sitting in a holding cell waiting for your bail hearing, I used the capital generated by my blind trust to make a few strategic investments," I explained, my voice echoing coldly off the concrete walls. "I purchased debt. Leo, specifically, I bought out the fraudulent second mortgage you secretly placed on your parents' retirement home. Immediately after that, my legal team tracked down your underground cryptocurrency lenders and bought out every single one of your black market promissory notes at a premium." He looked up at me, his face a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. "I am no longer just your ex-wife," I stated, leaning slightly forward so he could fully grasp the absolute totality of his defeat. "I am your sole, exclusive creditor. I own the roof over your aging parents' heads, and I own the debts that are keeping you alive. I hold the absolute survival of your entire family in the palm of my hand." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my briefcase, a finalized federal plea agreement, and placed it gently on top of the debt portfolio. I set a sleek black pen next to it. "You are going to sign this plea deal right now." I told him, "You will accept the minimum federal prison sentence, and you will permanently waive every single legal right to any marital asset, spousal support, or future claim against me or Vanguard Kinetics. In exchange, I will allow your parents to live out the rest of their days in their home, completely rent-free. But if you refuse to sign, or if you even attempt to negotiate, I will initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings before I even reach the lobby elevator, and your parents will be sleeping on the freezing streets of Chicago by the end of the week." There was no argument. There was no final burst of arrogant defiance. The last remaining spark of his ego was instantly extinguished. Leo collapsed forward, his forehead resting against the cold metal table, and he began to weep silently. With shaking, defeated hands, he picked up the pen and signed his name, surrendering his entire life to me in total, inescapable despair. I pulled the signed document away, placed it neatly back into my briefcase, and stood up. I walked toward the heavy door. I did not offer him a goodbye. I did not look back even a single time. When I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the federal building, the razor-sharp chill of the Chicago winter air hit my face. I took a deep, commanding breath. It tasted like absolute, boundless freedom. A sleek black town car was idling by the curb, waiting for me. I smiled and stepped into the warm, leather-back seat. As the driver pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the glowing screen. It was an automated market notification. The Vanguard Kinetics project had just officially launched its initial public offering. The stock was skyrocketing. I had completely eradicated a toxic parasite from my life, and the ground was finally clear to build my empire. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As a reminder, our channel is currently operating with absolutely zero budget due to recent demonetization. If you found today's story thrilling and empowering, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the secure PayPal link located in the video description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity ensures that our hardworking team can feed their families and continue bringing you the absolute best revenge stories on the internet. Thank you for your time, and stay strong.